Hello. Today we're going to cover Chapter 8 entitled Police Ethics and Police Deviance. So, this is an interesting chapter. I'm sure most of you watch the news and are familiar with um, a lot of things that have happened over the last, since police have been around. So, we're going to kind of dig into a little bit of that and hopefully learn some more. So we discussed police discretion in chapter 5. So as we progress through this chapter, keep some of those things on your mind as they're very relevant in this chapter as well. Police in the United States have a tremendous amount of authority and discretion. The media tends to only cover the bad parts of policing, though. So the general perception typically of the public is often that police are bad. Realizing that the media wants to get views and they want to get clicks, this is understandable that this is why they're publishing what they're publishing. Keep in mind, though, that police do thousands of good acts every day, and they rarely, if ever, make the news. The vast majority of police are ethical, but because of a few, this is a topic that, unfortunately, we do have to cover. So, what is ethics? It's good to have a solid understanding or foundation of ethics before we move into the rest of the chapter. So, your book defines it as the study of what constitutes good or bad conduct. An example of a basic ethical tenet would be the understanding that lying is wrong. So, I think we could all agree that that is one ethical thing that we expect everyone to follow, but especially police. So there have been some standards established to determine how police should act. If you go back to chapter 1, we talked about Peel's 9 principles, Sir Robert Peel. Also, your book talks about author Jocelyn Pollock. She wrote a book called Ethical Dilemmas and Decisions in Criminal Justice. I'm sorry. She goes on to talk about some standards for how police should act, being the organizational value systems or code of ethics within each department, the oath that officers take to move into office, and a law enforcement code of ethics. And there is a video on law enforcement code of ethics in your overview for this chapter, so make sure that you watch that video. Next comes the topic of law versus order. So the very nature of police in American culture contains an inherent conflict. So in this, police face ethical dilemmas daily in which they have to use discretion. Every situation is different and has different circumstances, so there's not always, or rarely is there ever, a black and white answer to an issue. So officers have to and are expected to weigh many variables in often a matter of just seconds. They're having to make these decisions in situations that are often under high stress also. So the average citizen doesn't have to make decisions in this way. So sometimes we have to take a step back, put ourselves in that officer's role, or put ourselves in that position and think about how difficult it might be for us to carry that out. So there's been numerous national commissions that have looked into police operations. I'm just going to list them out. One of them is the National Commission on Law Observance and Enforcement. Enforcement. That was also known as the Wickersham Commission, which we covered in a previous chapter. That was formed in 1931. The Presidential Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice, which we covered in Chapter 7, which was from 1967. The National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, which we also covered in Chapter 7, also known as the Kerner Commission. There's many more that your book lists out. There's also state and local commissions, panels, and hearings that look into the behavior and operations of the police. So there is oversight. Next, we'll move into police corruption. So there's a video in the overview for this module on the 75th Precinct police corruption. This is a video on New York Police Department 75th Precinct. Really good video. And it's also your discussion board for this week, so make sure you watch that. But there's a couple different definitions in your book of what police corruption is. You know how I like to start with definitions. So, Herman Goldstein defines police corruption as acts involving the misuse of authority by a police officer in a manner designed to produce personal gain for himself or others. Karl Klockars defines police corruption as the abuse of police authority for personal gain or organizational gain. So there's a couple more definitions in your textbook too, but what I want to point out is that both of these definitions have some things in common here. They both involve the abuse or misuse of power and something to gain. So the officer is gaining something out of this. But like I said, there are many definitions of police corruption. Some other examples of police corruption: police accepting money, goods, or services for ignoring actions they are sworn to invoke legal procedures against, essentially turning a blind eye on an action. So your book then goes on to give a general consensus on the definition of police corruption, and states that a police officer is corrupt when he or she is acting under his or her official capacity and receives a benefit of something of value for doing something, or refraining from doing something, essentially not doing something. So if we were in person, we would have a whole discussion on what constitutes something of value. Is a cup of coffee from Wawa, is that of value? Is someone that you're about to arrest giving you a $10 gift card for somewhere, is that considered police corruption? Based on you doing something in exchange for receiving that. So take a minute and think about what you consider to be something of value that you think a police officer should not be taking in the line of duty. Then your book goes on, page 237, to address a few reasons why we have police corruption. So it's important that you read those, because while they don't excuse police corruption, they give some reasons why it might happen. Then we move into different types of corruption. So there's what we call grass eaters and meat eaters. Grass eaters are more of your passive type of corruption. They accept opportunities of corruption when they become available, but they're not actively seeking them out. So if some situation presents itself, they might jump in, but they're not actively looking. The meat eaters, on the other hand, they are the more aggressive type of police corruption. They are seeking out and taking advantage whenever they can of any opportunity for corruption. Then there's a bribe, and I'm sure you are all aware what a bribe is, but I just want to cover it. Payment or otherwise accepting of something by a police officer in order for the citizen to avoid getting in trouble. So this often includes some type of payment for an officer to not enforce a law, and it's considered a more serious form of corruption. Then we have noble cause corruption. This is where police officers bend the rules a little bit because they want to achieve what they believe to be the right goal of putting the criminal in jail, or what they believe to be the criminal in jail. This is often referred to as the Dirty Harry syndrome. An extreme example your book mentions: a police officer justifying violating a suspect's rights in order to save a life. Another example, if we were in class, we would have a discussion about this too, because this is a good topic. An officer knows that the suspect committed the offense, but he or she doesn't have enough evidence to get probable cause. They might lie on their police report and say that the suspect admitted to something. So it gives them enough probable cause that they can charge the offender and put them in jail. That's considered noble cause corruption. Rotten apple theory. This is a theory in which it is believed that individual officers within an agency are bad, rather than the department as a whole. So when a lot of these police corruption issues come up throughout the media, people kind of take one of two sides typically. They either think, oh, well, that individual officer was bad and he or she should be punished for what they did, or police as a whole are bad, or maybe that department as a whole are bad. So there's kind of two views that you can take to that. There's some other types of police misconduct that your book covers: drug-related misconduct, sleeping on duty, police deception, sex-related misconduct, and domestic violence in police families. There's also a video in your overview for this module on domestic violence in police families, so you can learn a little bit more about that there outside of the textbook. One thing I want to point out, though, if you think about these other types of police misconduct, almost every single one of them is in every other field that we have in our country of workers. There is sex-related misconduct, there is lying, there are people sleeping on the job, there are people abusing drugs. So this is not really specific to police. And so I want you to sort of expand your mind with this, that while these issues are at the forefront now because this is a law enforcement course, and obviously police are held to a higher standard than your average citizen, but a lot of these things that we're talking about are very common in other fields. So your book does a good job covering responses to police corruption. That starts on page 250 in your textbook. And in addition, police can also be held civilly and criminally responsible for their misconduct. So they don't have a get out of jail card free. When you're done with this video, I want you to do a quick Google search or research in however you like, qualified immunity. Look up, see what that is. It's a hot topic now, and surprisingly, your book doesn't cover it. So this would be another discussion that we would have if we were in person. So check out qualified immunity, learn about it, form an opinion on it. All right, that's it for chapter 8. See you next time.